The leader of terrorist group Al-Qaeda, Ayman al Zawahiri, has been killed in a drone strike carried out by the CIA in Afghanistan, the US government has confirmed. Al Zawahiri was one of the world's most wanted terrorists. He helped plan the 9/11 attacks and was Osama bin Laden's successor. Well, joining me on the show now is Dr. Alan Mendoza, who's the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society think tank. Alan, great to have you back on the programme. Cautious celebration that this key figure in Al-Qaeda has been taken out, or is this really a seminal moment in the war on terror?
Well, it's definitely a moment for a celebration in the sense that here's a man who, in a sense, co-authored the mass murder of 9/11 with Osama bin Laden. And justice has been a long time delayed for him, 21 years, in fact, delayed for him. But what it shows terrorists around the world is that you may think you'll get away with this, and you might even get away with it for a while, but ultimately we will come for you and we will get you. And that is indeed what's happened here. And the message here is clear. You can run, you can even hide, but we will get you eventually.
There's an interesting dynamic playing out that I haven't quite wrapped my head around here, having spoken to a number of people about this today, and that is the relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Of course, al-Zawahiri taken out in Afghanistan. One assumes the Taliban weren't particularly informants or helping the CIA in that mission. Were they actually instead potentially willfully housing members of Al-Qaeda?
Well, there's less of a mystery than this than people might assume, because for the entirety of their time together, the Al-Qaeda have sworn an oath of allegiance to the Taliban, as was well known in the 1990s. Bin Laden and al-Zawahiri swore an oath to Mullah Omar they would serve him. That has continued ever since. There was a reaffirmation a few years ago. The Taliban were a little sort of publicly embarrassed about it, but they didn't, renege on it or reject it in any way. And so I think the second of your theories are correct. It is quite clear that someone of this person's notoriety, who would be, kind of well known on the streets, for him to be essentially living his life perfectly normally in Kabul under the watch of the Taliban must indicate that they, at the very least, had knowledge of where he was.
Essentially, I mean, I've heard that Al-Qaeda have been quite critical of the Taliban not being extremist enough, perhaps, for their particular tastes. Does this risk dragging the Taliban into a direction that makes them perhaps even more dangerous than we have come to think about Taliban 2.0?
Well, the Taliban 2.0 is no different to Taliban 1.0. The same sort of hideous principles lie their rule. They've not changed their beliefs at all, any way, shape or form. And they've not, ever sort of turned in the many terrorists we know are still actively living on their soil. So the idea there's a new Taliban is for the birds. I think obviously they benefited from a period of quiet, obviously, where the relationships with terrorists were not particularly well scrutinised, and certainly there has been a sort of dispute, if you like, between the ISIS offshoot in the area and the Taliban. But it doesn't mean the Taliban are softies. We know full well what they're capable of. They've reinstalled a lot of the previous dictums from when they were in power in the 1990s, and life in Afghanistan is pretty grim, particularly, of course, if you're a woman.
I mean, the UK and the US spent $1 trillion in 30 years fighting the Taliban, ostensibly to protect us back here in America and the UK. Do they remain a direct threat to the West, or have times changed?
Well, the Taliban, if you remember, were always the harbourers of terrorists, as opposed to the people who were attacking the West directly. I mean, their own particular focus was on, capturing Afghanistan. But they were perfectly prepared to live and work with terrorist groups whose aim was to attack the West. And of course, the reason for this is that religiously they're on the same spectrum. This isn't that they are wildly opposed with changed religious doctrines. It was just a different focus in terms of what the Taliban wanted versus what groups like Al-Qaeda wanted. The reality is that as long as the Taliban are in control of Afghanistan, the space in Afghanistan is perfectly capable of being colonized by terrorist groups who, of course, wish the West ill. And this is, of course, why some of us thought it was absolute madness when the US and others, of course, withdrew from Afghanistan so quickly last summer. A different approach could easily have worked and would have prevented these terrorists from being able to live in peace on Afghan soil.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, fantastic to have you back on the programme today, explaining us all of that stuff in immense clarity.